We've chosen an episode, in particular episode 4, from Chris Lilly's Summer Heights High. The show portrays Chris Lilly as 3 characters, Mr. G, Jonah and Jemay, who are all members of a real Australian high school. The show presents an accurate and comic depiction of public schools in Australia. We've chosen this particular piece because we're young, we've completed high school not too long ago, and we can relate to the characters and storyline of the show. We believe these stereotypes are an extremely accurate representation of some of Australian schools today. The attached image is a photo that was edited by Jemay, a private school girl who was attending classes at Summer High, and clearly displays issues of racism, socioeconomic barriers, and social pressures that high school students deal with on a day-to-day basis. This podcast will delve into the issues of low socioeconomic statuses, sexism, homophobia, and racism in the school setting. The title of the image insinuates issues of sexism, shaming, and socioeconomics, referring to the characters in the image as public school skanks and housing commission whore. Socioeconomic statuses can be described as the social and economic domain that an individual or group falls under. Studies by Considine and Zappala provide evidence that students from low socioeconomic statuses generally tend to display poorer performance than those from higher ones. Therefore, children from low socioeconomic backgrounds are placed into an unfair stereotype of possessing minimal opportunities and being less intelligent than other children. Performance isn't the only issue that arises from socioeconomic statuses. These students tend to be more at risk of bullying, especially coming from students like Jemay, who have had the privilege of a better education with greater school facilities and opportunities. An example of bullying displayed are the actions and dialogue displayed by Jemay throughout the whole series. She constantly refers to the school, along with the students and teachers from the school, as povo, which is an adjective to describe someone from a disadvantaged background, short for poverty. As someone who grew up in a suburb considered of being of low socioeconomic background, I am able to relate to the difficulties faced with the lesser opportunity and the stereotypes that other children thrust upon us. The image and episode we've presented does not make me feel uncomfortable, as all the issues raised around socioeconomic statuses are issues that I've been exposed to and dealt with for the majority of my life. As a teacher, presenting the image to students may not be totally appropriate, as it does contain vulgar language. However, it provides humour on a usually unfortunate, or for some, isolating situation. It may be more suitable to show older students in order to introduce the topic issue. This would make it possible to discuss and reassure the students that they are able to achieve great things no matter where they come from. It may be more difficult for teachers to deal with children from low-income families, as they present an increased risk of developing behavioural difficulties. Studies show that parents from low-income families also spend less time helping children with their schoolwork, which can present many difficulties and frustration for teachers. As a teacher, I try to maintain regular contact with parents and try to inspire them to provide assistance to their children. Teaching these children may present as hard work. However, the results of focusing and putting in effort to better them, can prove to be life-changing for them, as I have seen firsthand. Sexism is something I believe occurs quite a lot at secondary schools. From my experience, boys would stick with boys and girls would stick with girls. The problem about sexism in schools is the ignorance from those who are displaying the behaviour. Generally, high school students don't usually understand a great deal about sexist behaviour. They'll call each other names and sexualise each other without fully understanding a great deal about sex and issues around sex. There tends to be a lot of tension between females aged 12 to 15 as they compete for romantic relationships and sexual desires. This tension may often erupt into physical and verbal violence, and young females will become sexist towards each other, as seen in the image. Females behaving sexist to one another only upholds the values and ideals that sexism is okay, which in turn encourages males to do it too. From a teacher's perspective, this image that presents sexism provides a resource to professional development. Sexism is bound to happen in schools, so the image provides a good example of what may occur in schools and the behaviour that children display around the issue. If this image were to be presented to me as a teacher in a school, I'd collaborate with my colleagues and the principal to share advice and ideas on how to minimise the occurrence of sexism. The sexist tone of the image does not make me feel uncomfortable, as I have been exposed to it for much of my time at school, and I understand why kids use it as a form of bullying. It does, however, make me feel sad that these issues are still present in Australian schools today, and knowing it'd be difficult to rid schools completely of it makes me feel somewhat helpless.
Racism is a long-standing factor that has always had a place in the school setting. The prevalence of racism is declining in schools for reasons such as greater diversity in communities, increased education and interventions. However, it still exists. Episode 4 touches on ignorance, generalizations, and stigmas of racism, particularly on Asian culture and Native Islanders. The stereotypical assumptions in this episode consisted of taunting words like "try hard Asian," "I thought black people were supposed to have rhythm," and "all Asian countries are the same thing." The episode is also situated around a young Tongan boy who comes from a low socioeconomic background and is deeply disadvantaged. He is portrayed as a racist, self-centered, and ignorant boy who will do whatever it takes to avoid schoolwork and responsibility of his own actions. The low socioeconomic school in this episode consists mainly of white Caucasian students. The ethical issue raised in the episode gyrates around equity and equality for diverse cultures. It is clearly evident the school struggles with racial interventions and embracement of diversity. I was in Year 7 at the time of this episode aired, and I vividly remember the racism and Caucasian privilege within my school. As the years went on, the school became greater in diversity. Attending an all-boys private school may have sheltered me to many examples seen in this episode. However, racism and stereotypes were definitely of prevalence. Native Islanders and Aborigines who have grown up in rural or in lower socioeconomic environments are known to be disadvantaged, having less development than those with greater resources. An example from the episode sees Jonah, a young disadvantaged islander, use any excuse to get out of work and trouble. This is evident when Jonah makes racist remarks to his teachers and fellow students. It is clear that Jonah needs special help and is at a far lower level than his peers. The episode uses racism to express issues such as public school funding and lack of resources required to assist students like Jonah. Development of students vary and can be evidently seen in low SES schools. Teachers have a large role to play in stamping out racism in an immigrant country such as Australia. The implementation of multicultural policy has been seen to vary. This is associated with the SES of the schools and its surroundings. Overall, the racism shown in this episode is an accurate depiction of what can be seen in the school setting. Ignorance of race and culture can be seen at high levels. The episode alerts the audience that a lack of diversity still exists in schools, and greater interventions and funding are needed to fix this imbalance. The episode does not make me uncomfortable, as the way the show portrays itself is lighthearted and comical. As a teacher, I would use this episode as good reference to remind myself how racism can be portrayed by high school students and that it always will exist in a way. The episode can be used as a reference to create interventions and scenarios for when issues do arise in the classroom. The final topic raised in this episode was homophobia. Homophobia can be the intentional or unintentional fear or hatred towards homosexual people. Students use this type of insensitive slang throughout the episode. The use of this terminology was particularly thrown around in reference to something that isn't cool, popular, or manly. In the episode, Jonah used this terminology repeatedly, and from my understanding, he did not understand the offence and origin of the words. This is due to many reasons: Jonah's low socioeconomic status, his parents' parenting style, and lack of education. Jonah's father is a single parent who migrated from Tonga. He comes from a background lacking education and appropriate parenting styles. The impact of this permissive parenting style has contributed to Jonah's lack of maturity and enhanced his impulsiveness. The impact homophobic slurs can cause can be mild to severe, depending on how sensitive an individual may be to them. Homophobia in a school setting may not always be an intentional attack or a direct message to a student. It can be used to describe something that is unpopular to them or thrown around as a joke. The clearly inappropriate words have a meaning. If used in the wrong way, people may get hurt, and students need to know this. The effects of homophobic attitudes in school settings have different influences of people. Students can pick up on what others are saying and doing, leading to a wide spread of inappropriate behaviour. This imitation has been linked to the social learning theory. The imitation theory consists of mimicking others who are around you and learning from their behaviours. Many issues arise around the topic of homosexuality in schools. Some students may not have realised their sexual orientation, others may have and are not ready to share the information to others. Bullying on this topic is widespread and can lead to students harming themselves or others. An extreme example is from 2008. A young Californian boy was shot after asking out another student. Larry was a flamboyant boy and open about his sexual orientation. The student who shot Harry was homophobic and took offence to what he was asked by Larry. This student was clearly triggered by something, whether that was his personal circumstances, lack of education, an issue during his child development, or all of the above. Teachers, parents, and youth need to be more informed and equipped to address all forms of bullying and harassment caused by gender identification and orientation. The Catholic boys' school I attended during my high school years always faced jokes such as, "Your school is gay." This may have been harmless for heterosexuals like myself. However, being in a school of over 1,000 young men, a percentage would take offence to it due to identifying as homosexual or having a connection to someone who is. Reflecting on my high school years, I remember people who were bullied for acting in a homosexual manner and being very timid due to this bullying. This evokes a strong message to me that schools need to be more aware and informed to address the serious issues of homophobia. As a teacher, I accept diversity and pass no judgment to anyone's sexual identity or sexual orientation. This artifact can be used as a good topic of discussion for when I do begin a role as a graduate teacher. I know issues concerning homophobia will arise in school, so in order to be prepared for them, I will gather resources and speak to my future colleagues on ways to address the issue and matter and ways in which I can positively impact the school setting. Low socioeconomic status, sexism, racism, and homophobia are all prevalent issues throughout the Australian school system. Some issues are higher in low SES schools, other issues may be greater in more conservative private schools. Stereotypes and bullying are the common denominator of these issues. In this particular episode, Chris Lilly's perpetuation of stereotypes gives a great insight of multiple issues in schools, which helps develop awareness and strategies for professional development and student scenarios. All issues are forms of diversity that need greater interventions and awareness. From this podcast, it has become clear that teachers do not only educate a curriculum, they are responsible for the safety and general development of a child's well-being.